Whatever you do, don't look at the end of the parade. That was the first thing my cousin Lila said to me when I stepped off the bus in Havenwood. No, welcome. No, how was the ride? Just those words, delivered in a breathless rush, her hand clamping around my wrist like she was afraid I'd vanish. I blinked at her. Okay. Is that like a tradition or something? She didn't smile, didn't even blink. Her gaze scanned the quiet street behind me, like she was checking for something or someone. Emma, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm not joking. Do not look. People vanish. Every year. Her grip was firm and cold, and it lingered long after she let go. I tried to laugh it off, but the look in her eyes stuck with me. Something about the intensity of it made the air feel a little heavier. We didn't talk much on the walk to her house, just exchanged a few strained comments about the weather and the festival. Havenwood was picture perfect in that unsettling way. Old towns sometimes are Victorian homes with pristine porches, lamp, posts wrapped in red and gold ribbons, and banners fluttering overhead announcing Havenwood Harvest Parade 121st Annual Celebration. It should have felt festive, warm, but the air was too still, too quiet. I noticed it first when we reached Main Street. People were already gathering, lining the sidewalks as the parade's starting hour approached. Kids in paper masks skipped ahead of their parents. Vendors sold caramel corn, hot cider, and little glowing balloons shaped like foxes and owls. At first glance, it seemed charming, but the more I watched, the stranger it felt. Everyone's movements were just off, too smooth, too synchronized, like they were part of some invisible choreography. The laughter sounded rehearsed, too polished. Even the breeze felt manufactured, like the air was being filtered through some unseen machine. I turned to Leela. Okay, seriously, why are you being so cryptic? What's with the whole don't look thing? She opened her mouth like she might answer, then shut it again. Her shoulders stiffened. Just trust me. When the parade comes, watch the floats. But when the last one passes, close your eyes, don't listen. Don't turn around, don't look. Before I could press her, a cheer rose up from the crowd. The parade was starting. A low hum vibrated through the air, followed by the faint thump of distant drums. The crowd collectively hushed, like a church congregation awaiting a ritual. My stomach tightened. The first float rolled into view from around the bend, and I forgot how to speak. It was a towering sculpture of flame-colored paper lanterns, suspended in an intricate lattice of golden wire. They pulsed gently, each glow, flickering in perfect rhythm with the drumbeat, casting dancing shadows across the buildings. Dancers flanked it, dressed in traditional folk garb, long embroidered coats, animal masks, bare feet that barely touched the ground. Their movements were flawless, not a single misstep. Their faces, what little I could see of them, frozen in bright, unblinking smiles. No one in the crowd spoke. They didn't even move. It was like the entire town was holding its breath. I felt my skin prickle. Why aren't they blinking? Lila didn't answer. I turned to her. She was trembling, her gaze locked on the float, her hands gripping the hem of her jacket like she was praying. Lila, I whispered, what is this? She didn't look at me. Keep watching. But not for too long. The next float emerged one darker, stranger. A massive, slowly spinning wheel covered in carvings of animals eating each other in an endless loop. Cloaked performers followed, their masks twisted in expressions of agony and bliss. The drumbeat deepened, a heavy, bone-shaking thump-thump that made my ribs vibrate. I could feel something in the air now, a pressure, like something ancient was pushing down on the town. Lila, I murmured again, barely able to swallow. Why is no one smiling anymore? She finally looked at me, and her eyes were filled with terror, because it's getting closer. The third float emerged in a slow, deliberate crawl. It was that wrong, a gigantic, coiled serpent constructed from interlocking metal plates twisted along the base of the float. Its open maw hissed a mechanical sound, but there was no engine, No animatronic system I could spot just movement, far too fluid for something made of steel. Its eyes, forged from dark glass, seemed to shimmer and track the crowd. Don't look too long, Lila murmured beside me, her voice no louder than a leaf brushing across pavement. My eye snapped away. I tried to breathe slowly to steady myself, but it was like the air had thickened. My lungs resisted. My heart felt like it was matching the drums, slow, then fast, then slow again. The rhythm was off. Or maybe I was. Another float rolled in, and this one nearly stopped my breath entirely. It held a towering, featureless statue 8 feet tall, maybe more wrapped in bandages, soaked with something dark and wet. A group of performers danced around it, wearing masks shaped like their own faces, not animals, not abstract expressions, their own faces. Only their mask faces were stretched grotesquely wide, like wax melted into a grin. The real people underneath, I wasn't sure they were even moving. Their limbs jerked, spasmed, but there was no soul in their eyes. Emma, Lila said suddenly. Her hand gripped mine like a vice. Don't ask. Don't think. Just keep watching. And then we close our eyes. That's it. That's all we have to do. Until when? Until the drums stop. I nodded. I wanted to say I understood, but I didn't. Not really. And I think that was the point. Because this wasn't about understanding. It was about surviving. The crowd was shifting subtly now. Not moving. Exactly, just hardening. Like people were being molded into something less than human. Their eyes had dulled. Their mouths were either shut tight or slightly open, as if waiting to be fed commands. I turned back to the parade, heart hammering. Another float loomed into view. It carried a black mirror. Nothing else, just a massive, liquid dark surface suspended vertically on a pale stone platform. At first, I thought it was just glass. But as it passed in front of us, I saw shapes inside. Faces, hundreds of them, screaming, pressing outward against the surface. Their eyes hollow and their mouths stretched wide in frozen agony. The glass didn't reflect us. It reflected only them. I took a step back. What is that? It's the ones who looked, Lila whispered. They don't die, they just change. The words hit like ice water. You're serious. I have seen it once before, she said. When I was a kid, my friend Ethan didn't close his eyes in time. I watched him vanish. 1 minute. He was standing next to me, then he was just gone. And a year later, I saw him again, inside that float. My blood ran cold. You're saying the floats are made of... Her hand covered my mouth just as the drums changed. Again, faster now, frantic. The performers began spinning, their limbs flailing in unnatural arcs. The crowd stiffened, a ripple of tension surging like an electrical current. It's starting, Lila whispered. The final float comes next. She squeezed my arm so tightly I winced, but I didn't shake her off. I was afraid of losing contact, like she was the only thing anchoring me to this reality. What happens if I don't close my eyes in time? I asked, voice trembling. She didn't answer. Instead, she stared dead ahead, and her body began to tremble again. I followed her gaze, and then I saw it. The last float had not yet turned the corner, but I felt it before I ever laid eyes on it. The air changed, heavier, wetter, like we were standing in the breath of some giant, invisible thing. The buildings dimmed, not with the setting sun, but as though the light itself was being eaten. Street lamps flickered. The wind stopped, and the crowd, they weren't people anymore. They were statues, hollow vessels with wide, unblinking eyes. A figure emerged from behind the final float. It walked on 2 legs, but nothing about it was human. Its skin shimmered with shadows, its form flickering between shapes with every stepchild, animal, corpse, stranger. Its head turned slowly, too slowly, scanning the crowd. Then it stopped walking and looked straight at me. It shouldn't have been able to see me not with hundreds of people between us, not with the shadows cloaking its warped shape, but it did. And in that moment, I knew something awful. It had always been looking for someone. And this year, it had chosen me. I couldn't move. My feet were rooted, my breath shallow. The creature's form twitched like a broken film reel, stuttering through shapes that hurt my brain to process. A gaunt woman with twisted limbs, a hairless beast crawling on human hands, a child with no mouth. All of them flickered within its frame. Its head, if that's what it had, tilted at an angle that made my neck ache just to watch. I felt its attention settle on me like a hand pressing down on the crown of my skull. And then I heard it, a voice. Not loud, not in my ears down inside. In my head, Emma. The sound stretched, warped, and unraveled my name into something ancient and wrong. I felt it crawl through my brain like a vine, wrapping around my memories, and I gasped. My knees buckled. I was going to fall. Lila grabbed me, holding me upright with strength that didn't seem possible from her trembling frame. Don't look at it, she hissed. You look too long. That's how it gets in. I didn't mean to, I whispered. It saw me. It always sees someone. Her voice cracked. But it only takes the ones who look willingly. I wanted to believe that meant I still had a chance, but it was already inside me. I could feel it now, memories shifting like sand underfoot. My 7th birthday. The smell of my mother's lavender shampoo. My old dog's bark. All slipping. The drums changed again, now frenzied and chaotic, like dozens of heartbeats pounding at once. The final float rounded the corner. I had expected something grand, terrifying. But it wasn't a float at all. It was a void. A pulsing wall of darkness that dragged light into itself. Shadows bled off it, crawling along the pavement like oil. The crowd didn't cheer, didn't breathe. They simply stood there as the dark advanced, their mouths parted, their eyes wide and unfocused. And from the center of the void, it stepped forward. It didn't walk. It unfolded, like it was being born from the shadows around it, part fog, part nightmare. Its shape was never still, and the longer I looked at it, the more it looked like me, my features distorted, my eyes hollowed, my mouth grinning too wide. Lila screamed in my ear, Emma, close your eyes. But I couldn't. It had its hooks in me. The creature lifted my hand and pointed at me, and then the crowd vanished. The sky tore open like paper. I was falling, but not through air, through thought, through memories, through every regret I'd ever buried. A girl sobbing in the rain, reaching for someone who was no longer there. A funeral I never attended. The hateful things I said and the worst things I didn't. All of it spilled out before me like pages of a book on fire. And at the center of it all, the thing smiled with my face. Stop it, I whimpered. You looked, it said. Now you're part of the end. Suddenly, hands yanked me backward. The world snapped into place. The crowd returned. The sky stick shut. Lila. She was screaming, shaking me. Emma, close your eyes. I shut them, tighter than I ever had in my life. The sound of drums shattered into static, then whispers. 1,000 voices all speaking in different tongues, layering over one another. I felt something warm drip from my nose. Blood. The creature was still in my mind, still clawing at my memories, still peeling them away. But then something shifted. A voice cut through the static. Faint, familiar. Lila's. Hold on. Hold. Onto me. I reached blindly, my fingers finding hers. She gripped me like a lifeline, pulling me through the sound, the shadow, the madness. I've got you, she said, and somehow that was enough, because I felt the whispering begin to fade, the shadows recede, and finally the drums stopped. A silence dropped over Heavenwood like a guillotine blade. I opened my eyes. The parade was gone, so was the crowd. Only Lila and I remained, standing in the middle of Main Street. The pavement littered with ribbons and confetti, and not a single soul in sight. My voice came out as a croak. Where's everyone? Lila looked down the street at the place where the final float had vanished. Taken, she said. And then she turned to me, her eyes glistening. But you're not. You almost were. But not yet. The town was dead. No sound. No wind. No people. I stood with Lila in the middle of Main Street, surrounded by the shredded remnants of celebration discarded masks. Half-eaten candied apples, colorful ribbons clinging to the cracked pavement. The glow from the lanterns had faded, and the streetlights overhead flickered weakly, struggling to stay lit. It felt like we were the only two souls left in the world. Where did they go? I whispered. Lila didn't answer at first. She just stared at the empty road where the final float had vanished, her face unreadable, like she was trying to hold herself together with the last threads of her will. Eventually she spoke. Havenwood doesn't survive the parade. Not really. Her voice sounded far away. Every year, it folds in on itself. The festival is a ritual, a summoning, a payment. A payment? I echoed. For what comes at the end. The words made my skin crawl. I don't understand, I said. How can you live here if this happens every year? Why does no one leave? Why do they let it happen? She turned to me slowly, her eyes dull. Because there's nowhere to go. The people here, they're part of it now. It's not just tradition, it's obedience. It's fear. Some of them don't even remember anymore. The town erases things, rearranges them. I was shaking. But you remember? Lila gave me a hollow smile. Only because I saw it when I was a kid. My mother tried to protect me, but she was taken that year. And when I came back out of hiding, everyone acted like she'd never existed. Her name wasn't in the school records. Her photo was gone. Her grave was empty. Only I remembered. And I kept quiet because I knew I had to warn the next person who came close. I blinked at her, stunned. Me? Your family? Blood ties you to this place, Emma. It remembers you. That's why I noticed you tonight. I felt the air grow colder, like the mention of it was enough to stir the shadows again. What was that thing? I asked. At the end, Lila hesitated. No one knows. We call it the ending. The final form. The shadow of all things. Every year it takes something, and every year someone is foolish enough to look. Sometimes they're pulled in forever. Sometimes they survive. But either way, it remembers the ones who look. And now it remembers me. She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes was enough. I turned in place, staring at the hollow town around us. Buildings stood tall, but empty. Cars were still parked along the road, their engines cold. Shop doors hung ajar. But there were no voices, no music, no laughter. It was as if the entire population had been plucked out of existence mid-step. Can we leave? I asked. Right now. Lila didn't look hopeful. Not yet. Not until the cycle finishes. I frowned, but the parade ended. Not for us. A sound cracked through the silence. A sharp, metallic clink, like a chain hitting pavement. We both froze. Another clink. Closer this time. Run, Leela said. I didn't argue. We bolted. Down the street, our footsteps echoing unnaturally in the still air. I didn't know where we were going. I just knew we had to move. Behind us, I heard it again. The slow, dragging scrape of something heavy, following. We ducked into an alleyway. The buildings around us loomed crooked and distorted, like they had been partially melted and refrozen. Shadows bent in impossible directions. Time and space were warping. Havenwood was breaking. It's not done, Layla whispered. We interrupted it, and now it's hunting. I pressed my back to the wall, heart thudding. We need to find a way out. We can't go out the way we came, she said. The roads are gone. Didn't you feel it? When the drums stopped, the town unraveled. My breath came fast and shallow. Then what do we do? She stared at me for a long moment. Then we go to the origin, the heart of the festival. The altar. That word chilled me. There's an altar? She nodded slowly, buried deep beneath the town, beneath the old chapel. That's where the festival was born, where the endling was first summoned. If we can reach it before the town finishes collapsing, maybe we can stop it, or at least survive. I didn't like the sound of maybe, but it was the only option we had. So we ran, through alleys and back streets that twisted like intestines, past houses that pulsed with faint light behind their boarded windows, past street signs that displayed gibberish symbols, as if the town's very language was dissolving. And all the while we heard it, the thing behind us, following, getting closer, dragging chains across the bones of a dying town. The chapel stood at the edge of Havenwood, half swallowed by forest. It was ancient, older than any other building in town. Its stone walls were cracked with age, vines creeping up its bell tower like nature was trying to bury it. A crooked sign above the warped doors read St. Leor's Sanctuary, the letters nearly worn smooth. "This is it," Leela said, panting. "It started here." All of it. We didn't waste time with questions. Behind us, the town was still shifting, bending, collapsing in on itself. The parade was over, but its echo still throbbed in the walls. Of Havenwood, the thing that followed the Endling hadn't stopped hunting us. We slipped inside. The chapel's air was thick and bitter, heavy with incense and rot. Dust swirled in the dying light from stained glass windows, casting fractured patterns across the pews, but no one was here. Not anymore. We crept forward, the wooden floor creaking underfoot. The altar ahead was carved from black stone, its surface etched with symbols that made my eyes ache to look at. "This used to be sacred," Lila whispered, staring up at the crumbling crucifix above us. "Then they started making deals." "With that thing?" She nodded. "Generations ago, when the crops failed and the sickness spread, the town wanted salvation, so they offered worship. And in return, it gave them ... peace for a price." "What kind of price?" Lila stepped around the altar and knelt beside it, brushing away loose tiles with her hands. Beneath the altar was a trapdoor. I didn't like where this was going. "The townsfolk built a chamber beneath the chapel," she said. "They called it the Root. That's where the offerings were made. The drums, the floats, it all traces back to this place." The air shifted. Behind us, something creaked. I turned toward the back of the chapel. The main doors had shut on their own. The colored glass dimmed, as if the sun itself had blinked out. "We need to move," I said. Lila pried open the trapdoor, revealing a spiral staircase made of stone and rusted iron. The walls inside were wet and black with age. No light reached down there. Without another word, we descended. Each step echoed like a countdown. Down and down we went until the air grew cold and metallic. The narrow stairs opened into a wide chamber, lit by dozens of candles melted into the walls. Carvings covered every surface, worshippers kneeling before something faceless, dancers holding lanterns above pits of flame, a parade of floats with screaming faces hidden in their designs. At the center of the room was a stone platform surrounded by a shallow trench. Inside the trench were bones. Hundreds of them. Lila stepped into the center, her shadow dancing like it had a mind of its own. This is where they made the pact. I didn't want to be here. Every part of my body screamed. To run. The air felt alive, like it was watching me, breathing with me, and then the drums started again, not loud, not thunderous. Just a faint, faraway beat, like a heartbeat, echoing through the walls. "No," Lila said, backing up. "It's too soon." A gust of wind slammed the trapdoor above us shut. The candles sputtered, and I felt it descending. "We have to finish it," Lila said, fumbling in her coat. She pulled out a small leather book, bound in cracked twine. "This belonged to my mother. She tried to stop it once. She believed the cycle could be broken here. If we complete the ritual in reverse." She stopped. The drums grew louder. Something was coming down the stairs. "Amma," she whispered, pressing the book into my hands. "If I don't make it out, you finish this." I shook my head. "No, don't say that." But her face was pale, sweat slicking her brow. "It knows I helped you. It wants me now." "No." Then the shadows moved. The ending entered the chamber, not through a door, not through a wall. It unfolded into the space, like a hole torn in the fabric of reality. Its body bled light and shadow in equal measure. It didn't crawl or walk. It reached, its form stretching across the chamber like smoke with weight. It didn't need to speak. Its presence was enough. It had returned for its offering. For Lila, and she knew it. I'm sorry. She said, stepping toward it. I can buy you time, but you have to break the cycle. She turned to me one last time. Promise me. I shook my head again, eyes filling with tears. I can't. Promise me, Emma. The drums were deafening now. I clutched the book to my chest and nodded. I promise. Then Lila screamed louder than I'd ever heard anyone scream, and the endling surged toward her, engulfing her in a wave of shadows that swallowed her whole. She was gone, and I was alone, with only her mother's book. And the thing that now knew my name, Lila, was gone. The shadows had devoured her, and the endling had retreated, slipping back into the seams of reality like it had never been there. But its absence was worse than its presence. The silence it left behind was too complete. I stood in the underground chamber, alone, surrounded by candlelight and bones, holding the worn leather book to my chest. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were notes, drawings, translations, half legible, half insane, symbols that looped in on themselves, pages full of phrases written over like a warning or a prayer. Do not watch. Do not walk. Do not wait. The parade is not a celebration. It is a summoning. The final flow is not for them, it's for you. I flipped to the back, where the ink grew darker and the handwriting more frantic. There it was, a ritual. Or maybe an unritual. Steps written in reverse, designed to unwind the summoning that had become the town's curse. 3 actions to sever the tether. Break the eye of tradition. Unmask the mask, turn your back on the end. It sounded like madness, but it was all I had. I climbed back up the spiral stairs into the ruined chapel. The world above had changed. Havenwood wasn't a town anymore. It was a stage frozen mid-performance. The streets were littered with the remains of the festival, but none of it moved. The air was still like a held breath. Then the music started again. Only it wasn't coming from speakers. It came from everywhere. The ground, the sky, inside my own skull. The parade was still happening, even without floats, even without people. The final float was for me. I stumbled into the street, clutching the book. Lanterns swayed gently on invisible strings. Confetti fluttered through the air like ash, and at the far end of Main Street, something enormous stirred in the mist. The final float, incomplete, but rising, wheels dragging against the earth like shrieking violins. I knew what I had to do. Step 1, break the eye of tradition. I ran toward the town square, where the statue of the founder stood, old Mayor Galveston, top hat in hand, always watching. I climbed the pedestal and wrapped a loose iron rod around. The neck of the figure heaving until stone cracked and the head fell, shattering on the ground below. Something screamed high and metallic. The streetlights blinked out for several seconds, one tether broken. Step 2, unmask the mask. I moved fast, back toward the main avenue where the parade began. All the masks were still there on the floats, on the storefront mannequins, nailed to doors like trophies, faces with hollow eyes and painted grins. I ripped them down, one by one, as I pulled the last one free. The face beneath wasn't made of wood, it was real. Desiccated, mummified. A corpse had been hidden beneath every mask, the cost of every year. As I tore away the last mask, the ground beneath me shook. The wind returned, the fog peeled back. The final float was now facing me. Step 3, turn your back on the end. The hardest part. The final float was massive, and possibly tall. It was a structure of bone and paper and melted wax, shaped like a cathedral, on wheels. And within it, at the heart of it, stood the endling. It saw me. Its shape shifted. It no longer looked monstrous. It looked like Leela, then like my mother, then like myself. It wanted me to look, to acknowledge it, to validate it. But I turned and kept walking, and it screamed, a cry of rage and hunger that split the sky. The wind howled. The buildings shook. The town buckled around me, but I didn't look back. Not even when the streets cracked open. Not even when the light returned. Not even when the drums stopped. I awoke the next morning in the grass by the road leading into Heavenwood. Sunlight poured through the trees. Birds chirped. The town behind me was quiet, but not empty. People were there. Normal people. Moving about. Children laughing. Storefronts opening. The festival banners were gone, and so was the final float. No one noticed me lying there. No one mentioned the parade. No one asked about Lila. I walked into town and passed a bulletin board. A flyer flapped. In the breeze. Heavenwood Fall Festival. Cancelled indefinitely. Due to unforeseen circumstances, the annual event has been discontinued. Thank you for your understanding. Something had changed. Maybe I had severed it. Maybe it was just waiting for a new host. That night, back in my apartment hours away, I opened Lila's book one last time. At the very back, written in newer ink, was a final line I hadn't noticed before. The parade never ends. It only changes routes. And then I heard it. From outside my window. Distant, faint, but unmistakable. The sound of drums. Getting closer. I was born in Durnley, a small town tucked deep between two hills, where the trees lean a little too far over the roads and the fog clings to your clothes long after you've stepped indoors. People call it quiet, safe, and in a way they're right, nothing ever happens here. But that quiet isn't peaceful, it's watchful. When I was a kid, my grandmother used to say, Durnley remembers what it's supposed to forget. I never understood what she meant until the day I saw a street name that didn't exist. It started with an old map. I was helping out at the town archive, just a volunteer gig, digitizing dusty files for the Historical Society. The basement smelled like vinegar and mildew, and most of the maps were barely held together by their own glue. But this one caught my eye. It was a town layout from 1952, hand-inked, beautifully done. All the familiar streets were there, Willow Lane, Merrill Hill, Brackenridge, and so on. But one label made my stomach twist. Gravesend Street. I'd never heard of it. Never seen it. And I'd lived in Durnley my entire life. The street ran parallel to Brackenridge, tucked into the older part of town. A perfectly straight line, ending in a cul-de-sac with a little mark that looked like a park or maybe a well. I flipped through the file drawers, checking other maps, 1960, 1970, 1986. Gravesend was always there. But when I pulled out the most recent town plan, 2023, it was gone, erased, not renamed, removed, no alley, no vacant lot, no construction site. Just blank space. I thought it was a mistake, a cartographer's error or an abandoned project. But when I brought it up to Mr. Hobbins, the archivist who practically lived in that building, he stared at me like I'd said something filthy. Don't say that name. What name? I asked. You know a name? I blinked, holding up the map. Gravesend? I'm just curious. He lunged forward, yanked the map from my hands, and rolled it up with trembling fingers. Some things were taken out for a reason, he said, his voice brittle. We don't ask about that street. Not here. Not anywhere. He locked the map away in a drawer behind his desk and muttered something under his breath in a language I didn't recognize. That should have been my warning. But curiosity, like a parasite, had already burrowed in. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling the name. Gravesend. It tasted wrong in my mouth, like ash and iron. I tried looking it up online, but found nothing. No census records. No historical mentions. Even satellite maps of Durnley. Showed a smooth curve where the street should have been, like someone had painted over it with a careful brush. The strangest part, when I asked my parents, they froze. Who told you about that? My dad asked. Not angry, scared. I found it on an old map. He exchanged a look with my mom, and something silent passed between them. She stood up, walked to the kitchen, and returned with a ceramic jar she hadn't touched in years. She opened the lid, reached inside, and pulled out a photo. It was cracked with age, faded. It showed 4 kids, probably high schoolers, standing in front of a warped wooden sign, Gravesend Street. One of them was my dad. I stared at him. You said it didn't exist. He didn't meet my eyes. It doesn't, not anymore. I flipped the photo over. A date was written in neat blue ink. August 3rd, 1985. That was the year 3 teenagers went missing in Burnley. Vanished during the summer fair. Everyone had assumed it was a runaway situation. No suspects. No clues. Just gone. One of the faces in the photo wasn't my dad. It was Kevin Blackamore, one of the missing boys. The next morning, I walked the old part of town, followed the streets the map had marked. Willow, Brackenridge, Duskrow, nothing unusual. But then, right where Gravesend should have been, I found something strange. A narrow alley between two brick buildings, not a real street. More like the gap between forgotten things. It was lined with moss and broken bricks, too dark even at noon. There was no street sign, but scratched into the bricks on the corner was a single word, Gravesend. That night, I had a dream. I was walking the alley, only it wasn't night and it wasn't day. The sky above was gray, unmoving. At the end of the alley, there was a door. Not a house door. Something older. Stone. No handle. Just a keyhole and the faint sound of music behind it. Old-fashioned music. Something like a carnival waltz, muffled by stone. Then a voice spoke behind me, whispered dry as paper. You said the name? I turned, but there was no one there. Just the alley stretching back into fog. I woke drenched in sweat, the dream still clinging to me like cobwebs. My heart hammered against my ribs, and, for a second, I could still hear the waltz echoing faint, off-key, fading into silence. I told myself it was just a dream, just nerves. But when I glanced at my phone, I noticed something I couldn't explain. 3:03 a.m., the time I'd woken up the same time etched into the back of the photo I'd found in the jar, just below the date. Too faint to notice before. August 3rd, 1985. 3:03 a. My skin crawled. I needed answers. The alley was still there the next day. I went back during daylight, hoping it would look different, less strange, more explainable. But it didn't, exactly where the old map said Gravesend should be. Yet it led nowhere, so I thought. About 30 feet in, the walls on either side widened, forming a dead-end courtyard behind the buildings. Only it didn't feel like a dead end. It felt watched. There was no wind. No rustling trees. Just silence and a house that shouldn't have been there. It stood crookily in the far corner of the courtyard. Pale gray siding, moss covering the roof, windows blacked out as if smeared with soot. The house looked old, but I'd never seen it before. Not once in all my years walking that part of town. And it wasn't visible from the street. It was folded into the space as if Durnley had been forced to make room for it where none should exist. There were no numbers on the mailbox. No name on the door. But nailed to the porch was a single rusted sign, Gravesend. I turned to leave. I told myself I'd come back later with someone, Lila, maybe, or even the police. But as I walked back through the alley, I noticed something else, something even stranger. From the outside, the alley didn't exist. I came, out between two buildings, but when I turned around, there was just a blank brick wall. Solid, unbroken, no gap, no passage. I should have panicked. Should have screamed, but something deeper, colder set in. I'd crossed a threshold, and it knew I had. I called Lila that afternoon. We weren't close, not anymore, not since college. But I remembered she'd always been into local legends, and if anyone could help me make sense of this, it was her. To my surprise, she agreed to meet almost instantly. I was wondering how long it would take, she said when we sat down across from each other. I frowned. What do you mean? Lila stirred her coffee. You found it, didn't you? Gravesend. I froze. How do you know? She looked up. Because I saw it too, when I was 16. Same dream, same house, same alley that vanishes when you try to show someone. You've been there? She nodded slowly. Once, I didn't go in, but I got close. Close enough to hear something moving inside. Breathing, I swallowed. Why didn't you tell anyone? Leela leaned in. Because the town doesn't let you. I waited, heart pounding. You ever notice how people in Durnley don't really talk about the past? She asked. Not really. Sure, we have fairs, parades, historical plaques. But the real stuff, the disappearances, the things that don't make sense, it's like there's a filter over everyone's mind. You try to dig too deep, and the town pushes back. I thought of Mr. Hobbins, the missing map. The photo that shouldn't exist. I think Gravesend is a scar, Lila continued. A memory the town buried. But sometimes, if you dig too hard, the scar opens. And the house? She stared out the window as if expecting to see it reflected in the glass. It's not just a house, it's a gate. Something older than the town, maybe older than us. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That night, I did something stupid. I went back. I told myself I just wanted to look. Just once. But deep down, I already knew I'd been marked. I needed answers, and they weren't going to come from a dusty archive or a terrified archivist. They were behind that black door. The alley was there again, open like a wound. The courtyard hadn't changed, but the house had. The windows weren't blacked out anymore. They were glowing. Faint, golden light pulsed behind them, like something inside was breathing, slow and steady. The porch creaked as I stepped onto it. I reached for the door, but didn't touch it. Because it opened on its own. No sound, no wind. Just a soft, slow creak as the door swung inward, revealing nothing but darkness inside. No light, no shapes. Just a black hallway stretching far deeper than a house that size should allow. And then I heard it. The same waltz from my dream, playing faintly, from somewhere deep inside. And a voice low, genderless, layered in echoes. You spoke the name. I should have turned and run. But something about the voice, its calmness, the way it rippled through the air, kept my feet rooted to the porch. It wasn't a threat, not yet. It was more like an invitation. One I had already accepted the moment I said the street's name out loud. The waltz continued, slow and haunting, echoing through that impossible darkness. I stepped inside. At first, it felt like walking into a cave, cool, dense, soundless. The moment I crossed the threshold, the door behind me whispered shut, not slammed. Not locked, just closed, as though the house itself had exhaled. The hallway was longer than it had any right to be. I kept walking. The wallpaper was yellowed, curling at the seams. Portraits hung on the walls, blurry, indistinct, like someone had painted faces from memory and gotten details wrong. The eyes seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. At the end of the hall, I saw a saw case, and standing beside it in the glow of a single antique lamp was a figure, a boy, maybe 14. He wore clothes decades out of date. Collared shirt, suspenders, scuffed leather shoes. His skin was pale, almost waxy. His mouth hung slightly open, as if frozen mid-sentence. And he wasn't breathing. Kevin? I whispered before I could stop myself. His eyes snapped toward me. I took a step back, but he didn't move. You said it, he murmured. His voice was dry. Paper thin. You woke it up. I stared. At him, Kevin Blackamore. You're gone, he said, smiling faintly, but not lost. Not yet. I tried to speak, but the waltz got louder, drowning my thoughts. Kevin lifted one hand and pointed toward the stairs. You can still leave right now, but if you go any farther, it'll know you chose to stay. Then he turned and walked up the stairs. He didn't make a sound. I didn't follow, not right away. I stood in that dark foyer, heart pounding, the weight of something ancient pressing down on me. Then I saw a movement from the corner of my eye, a second figure standing in a side room just off the hallway. A woman this time, middle-aged. She was whispering to herself, rocking back and forth in a chair that was barely holding together. I inched closer. Her lips moved rapidly, too fast to follow. Then, all at once, she stopped. Her head twisted toward me in one unnatural motion. Eyes wide, bloodshot. You're not supposed to be here yet, she hissed. Who are you? Her mouth opened wider, wider than it should have. And from inside, I didn't see teeth or a tongue. I saw stairs, a spiral staircase, impossibly small, descending into a depth that did not belong in a human body. I stumbled back, gagging. She didn't move, just stared. Then she whispered something I'll never forget. Even the erase remember. What they were. I ran. Not out of the house, though I should have. I ran upstairs. I don't know why. Maybe part of me hoped Kevin was real, that he could explain. That this wasn't all a waking nightmare spiraling out of my control. The second floor was dimly lit. Narrow halls branched off like veins. Doors lined both sides, each slightly ajar. I moved slowly, feeling that familiar sensation of being watched intensify with every step. Then I reached the last room on the left. The door was closed. I knocked once. No answer. I reached for the handle. It was cold ice cold. Inside, the room looked untouched by time. Posters from the 80s lined the walls. A cassette player sat on a shelf beside dusty figurines. On the bed was a school backpack, frozen mid-unzip, and on the desk sat a notebook, open. My name was written at the top of the page. I hadn't written it, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was mine. I backed away, stumbling into the hallway. The music had stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I turned toward the stairs, but the hallway had changed. Stretched. Warped. Doors now lined both sides in endless rows. Some were open, revealing glimpses of impossible spaces. A train station suspended in darkness. A mirror showing a reflection I didn't recognize. A classroom full of students who weren't breathing. And then I saw them. The others. Figures began to emerge from the rooms, slowly, silently. Some were children. Some old, some dressed in styles I'd only seen in history books. But they all had the same thing in common. They weren't alive. But they weren't dead either. They moved like memories, flickering at the edges, trapped in a loop of their last thought, last action. One girl was brushing her hair endlessly. Another man scribbled something over and over in the air with an invisible pen. A woman screamed without sound, hands clutching her face. I turned, heart slamming. Kevin stood at the end of the hallway again. Only this time, he wasn't smiling. You shouldn't have come back, he said softly. Now it knows your name. I opened my mouth to ask who it was, but then the floor trembled. Low, distant, rhythmic, footsteps, heavy, coming up from below. Kevin's eyes widened in fear for the first time. You have to run. The sound of footsteps wasn't just loud, it was wrong. They didn't echo like footsteps on wood or stone. They boomed like something ancient dragging itself through the layers of the house. No, not the house. Reality itself, grinding down whatever remained in its path. Kevin backed away from me. You said its name? He opened the path. He whispered, eyes darting toward the stairs. Now it's coming to close the gate. I ran. The hallway twisted as I moved, doors shifting, stretching away from me as though the house itself was trying to keep me inside. Paintings changed when I passed them, melting into black and white photos of people with scratched out faces. The floor beneath my feet groaned, softened, turned to ash, and reformed in impossible shapes. I don't know how I found the staircase again. It was like swimming through a memory that didn't want to be remembered. When I reached the bottom, the foyer was gone. In its place was a vast open chamber. Cold, endless, and silent. At the center stood a single figure. Not tall. Not grotesque. Just dot wrong. It had no face. But somehow it was looking at me. Its body was covered in names written, stitched, burned into the skin in a dozen different languages. Some of them I recognized. Most I didn't, but one name pulsed. Brighter than the rest. Mine. The thing took a step toward me. The air bent. My ears popped. My thoughts shrank in its presence, like they didn't belong in the same room. Then Kevin appeared beside me, tugging hard on my arm. There's still a way out, but you have to forget. Completely. What? Your name, your street, your town. Erase it all. I stared at him. That's not possible. He pointed to the edge of the room where a small door had appeared. A janitor's closet, out of place in this endless space. That leads out, but you can't carry yourself through. If even one memory clings to you, it follows. The thing moved again. Slower now, savoring the moment. Kevin's grip tightened. You're not the first to find this place, but you might be the last to walk out. I ran with him toward the door. But halfway there, the thing spoke not in words, but in thoughts, dropped like stones into my mind. You know what this place is. You always have. I staggered. Images crashed through my skull. A forgotten street on every town's map, hiding in the fold. A place where all erased things go. Not hell, not even death. Graveyard for memory itself. Don't listen. Kevin shouted. It lies in meanings. That's how it finds you again. I reached the door. Kevin pushed it open. Inside was darkness. But not the bad kind. The comforting kind. Like the dark behind your eyelids just before you fall asleep. Kevin looked back one last time. You'll forget me. You'll forget all of this. What happens to you? He smiled. I was never really Kevin. He left years ago. I just wore what was left. And then he shut the door behind me. I woke up in my bed. Morning sunlight streamed through the blinds. Birds chirped outside. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Notifications, emails, a missed call. It was like nothing had happened. But something had. I didn't remember exactly what. Just impressions. A street that didn't exist. A house that wasn't there. A boy with a name I couldn't place. My shoes were muddy. My hand hurt like something had been carved into my skin and then erased. When I looked in the mirror, I saw nothing unusual. But for a split second, there was something behind me in the reflection. A figure. No face. Just names. Thousands of them. One was mine. I went about my day like everything was normal. Ate cereal. Answered work emails. Even made small talk with the mailman. But nothing felt right. People smiled, waved, laughed, but their expressions were a little too fixed, a little too rehearsed. Like actors who'd performed the same scene too many times. Even the sky looked ... off. It was a perfect blue. No clouds. No wind. But birds didn't fly. Trees didn't sway. The sun stayed exactly where it was, hovering like a spotlight in a staged play. And everywhere I went, I saw the same three people. A woman pushing a stroller, a teenager on a skateboard, a man in a suit holding a coffee. Different streets, different hours, but always them in slightly different clothes, playing the same parts, over and over. I tried asking someone my neighbor, Mrs. Holloway, about the strange loop. Her smile cracked only slightly. You're just tired, dear, she said sweetly. This town has a way of wearing on you. Then she shut the door in my face. I heard the deadbolt click. Twice. Later that night, I found the notebook on my desk again. The one from the house. The one that shouldn't exist. Same page. Same handwriting. My name written in thick, black ink. Only now there were more. Names below it, and each one was crossed out except the last. My name. I turned the page. In large block letters, one sentence was written over and over. Do not say IT. Then, at the bottom of the page, in shakier writing, you never left. You just think you did. I slammed the notebook shut, heart racing. That's when I noticed something carved into my desk shallow, jagged letters barely visible in the wood grain WTMO to street name. I hadn't said it out loud, but something felt it. The walls groaned. My lights flickered, and from outside my window, I heard footsteps. Slow, wet, heavy. I pulled the curtain aside. Nothing. Just the perfect night. Still and staged. And the reflection of the glass ... The figure with no face. Watching. Waiting. I decided to leave town the next day. Packed a bag. Filled the tank. Didn't say goodbye to anyone. But as I pulled out of my driveway, I noticed something strange. The street signs were blank. Every intersection, every turn, just white metal. No names. No directions. Even my GPS spun in a slow, confused loop. After 10 minutes of driving, I passed my own house again. Same crack in the driveway. Same gnome by the porch. Same curtain twitching, as if someone had just been watching me leave. I hit the gas. 30 minutes, 40, no matter how far I drove. I circled back. The town had curled in on itself. It wasn't a place anymore. It was a loop. At midnight, my doorbell rang. No one rings doorbells anymore, not at that hour. I answered it with a hammer in hand. On the porch stood the woman, with the stroller, but there was no baby. Her eyes were hollow, her smile too wide. "You're not playing your part," she said calmly. Behind her stood the teenager and the man in the suit. Their skin shimmered like paper stretched too thin over something else. "We keep the town stable," she whispered. "We keep the—" Door shut. I tried to speak, but they all took a step forward in unison. "You remembered a street that should never be remembered. Now it remembers you." I slammed the door. They didn't knock again. I don't know what this town is anymore. Maybe it was real once. A normal place with real people. But the moment I said the name out loud, I pierced whatever veil was keeping it anchored. Now the town is pretending. It's pretending to be normal, to be home, to be mine. But everything's just off. And every day, something else. Slips, the clouds stop moving, the clocks skip time. People smile wider, and the figure with the stitched skin watches from every mirror, every screen. Last night, I found another page added to the notebook. "You are the last. Soon, the street will be erased again. But this time, you go with it. It's been 3 days since I tried to leave. I stopped counting the time after that. The clocks don't matter here anymore. They tick, but they don't move. Every minute stretches like an hour. Every hour folds in on itself like a bad dream that starts over just when you think it's ended. The notebook is full now. Page after page of names, some scratched out, some burned straight through the paper. But only one name has been repeated more than once. Mine, each time in darker ink, thicker, almost alive. I don't remember writing it, but I must have. No one else is left. The town is almost silent now. No cars, no dogs barking. No wind. Even the birds have vanished from the sky. Only the three remain. The woman with the stroller, the teenager on the skateboard, the suited man with coffee. But they don't move anymore. They just stand still on different corners, heads slowly turning as I pass by, watching, judging, waiting. I've stopped sleeping. Every time I close my eyes, I hear it, the thing from the basement, the one with no face and a body, stitched with names, but it doesn't just whisper anymore. It chants over and over. "You said it. You said it. You said it." And I did. I said the name that wasn't supposed to exist. Westmouth. God. Even now, writing, it feels like I'm pressing a hot wire into my own mind, like I'm carving the word where it doesn't belong. But here's the thing they said never to speak. They never said what would happen if I rewrote it. So I tried something. I tore out the last page of the notebook, burned it. Then I grabbed a fresh sheet and wrote a different name, Northwell, a name that doesn't exist, a place that's never been, a lie. And for a moment, everything shuddered. The clouds started moving again. The temperature changed. A real breeze cut through the silence. For that single instant, I thought I could overwrite it all on my way out. But then I saw it in the reflection again. Not the stitch thing. Not the three pretenders. Me, but older, broken, hollowed out. He stared at me through the mirror, eyes like cracked glass. "You can't change it," he said. "You can only join it." Then the mirror shattered from the inside. I don't know how much longer I have. The town is unraveling now. Houses sink into the ground. Roads twist upward into the sky. The sun spins in circles like a dying bulb. Reality is falling apart in pieces, and I'm the thread holding it all together. The final page of the notebook was blank this morning. But when I looked again just now, one last message had appeared. When all names are forgotten, the thing becomes you. I'm scared that I understand what that means. This isn't just a town that erases things. It needs someone to remember. It wants soul to hold the memory so it can pretend to be real. Kevin tried to pass it on. So did the others. And now it's me. If anyone finds this, if somehow this notebook survives, do not search for the name. Do not speak it. Do not write it. And above all else, never look into the mirror when you feel like someone's watching. Because if you see yourself looking back with no reflection, it's already too late. You're the street now. The attic of my grandfather's house wasn't just dusty, it was a tomb. A still, suffocating chamber above the rest of the world, sealed away by time and memory. I hadn't been up there since his funeral. Even then, I hadn't gone farther. Then the doorway. But after my parents asked me to start sorting through his things, I knew I'd have to face it. Cobwebs clung to every rafter. The air smelled of mildew and dry paper. The boxes were stacked in crook towers, some collapsing under their own weight. Sunlight filtered through the circular window, painting pale beams that barely reached the back wall. I wasn't even looking for anything in particular. I just wanted to clear a few boxes before the weight of grief could sink its claws in again. That's when I found the trunk. It was under an old tarp, locked shut with a rusted latch. The lock broke easily with a screwdriver. Inside were bundles of old books wrapped in newspaper. Most were damp and unreadable, swollen with age. But at the very bottom, tucked between two faded volumes, I found the strange leather-bound book. The cover was cracked and brittle, its spine nearly disintegrated. It had no title. As I opened it, something slid out from between the pages and landed softly on the wooden floorboards. It was a map. The parchment looked handmade uneven edges. Yellowed by time, the lines drawn with a shaky, deliberate hand. There were no familiar landmarks, just jagged mountains, serpentine rivers, and big patches of forest. Symbols I didn't recognize were scrawled in the margins, circles, arrows, what looked like runes. The center of the map had one place, circled in dried, flaking red ink, Black Hollow. There was something else, too, a note folded neatly and tucked into the map's corner. My hands went cold as I read the shaky handwriting. Do not follow this map. Destroy it if you can. It leads only to ruin, grandfather. I stared at his handwriting for a long time. The words echoing in my head like a whispered warning. I should have closed the trunk, put the map back, and walked away. But I didn't. I unrolled the map again, my fingers tracing the path to Black Hollow. The place wasn't far. According to the markings, it was just past the old state forest that bordered the edge of town. It didn't make sense. I'd lived here my whole life. I'd never heard of Black Hollow. That night, I barely slept. When I did finally drift off, I dreamt of trees. Twisted and skeletal, the forest in my dream seemed alive with menace. The branches above wove together like iron bars, and the leaves whispered with breathless voices. I saw myself walking down a narrow trail through that nightmare forest, the map clutched tightly in my hand. My name echoed from the trees soft at first, then louder, as if something unseen was calling me deeper. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. My chest heaved, and my bedroom felt cold, too cold. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming. Then I noticed the map. It was in my hands. I blinked in disbelief, sitting up slowly. I had left it in the attic, or at least I thought I had. But there it was, folded neatly in my lap, like it had followed me down. The circled words, Black Hollow, seemed darker now, as if the ink had bled further into the page overnight. I put the map on my desk and tried to shake off the fear, convincing myself I'd simply brought it down without realizing. But I knew that wasn't true. Something was wrong. The next morning, I did the only thing I could think to do. I went to the library. The library was practically empty when I arrived. A few regulars milled around the front shelves, and Mrs. Conway, the head librarian, gave me her usual distracted. Not as I passed, I didn't stop at the front desk. I headed straight to local archives in the basement. The stairs creaked under my weight, and the air grew heavier with each step. The archive room smelled of dust and old glue, with rows of metal filing cabinets and boxes of brittle newspapers. This was the place where forgotten history went to molder, and maybe where answers waited too. I began with town maps, old ones. The deeper I dug, the stranger things got. A map from 1892 had a place labeled Black Hollow, nestled at the edge of the state forest. The surrounding area was marked with warnings: unstable terrain, closed routes, and most chilling of all, nitrogen monoxide entry ordered by county. But when I checked a 1930s version of the same area, Black Hollow was gone, not renamed, erased. There was just forest, labeled with a generic conservation area, no public trails. Like it had never existed. The hair on my neck stood up. I kept flipping through the documents, hunting for anything newspaper. Clippings, records, rumors, but there was barely a trace. Then I found a thin leather-bound journal tucked between two files. It had no label, no barcode, just a tag that read, property of George Hawthorne, handwritten. Don't file this. I recognized the name immediately. George Hawthorne was the founder of the Town Historical Society. He died sometime in the 70s under mysterious circumstances, if I remembered correctly. The journal was brittle, with notes scribbled in tiny script. Most of it was dry dates, reports, local geography, until I reached the final entries. October 12th, 1974, I followed the path again. The one near the crooked birch tree. It's still there, though the forest has done its best to reclaim it. I made it farther this time, about 2 miles. Trees twisted into shapes I don't understand. Heard whispers again, like wind through hollow bones. October 19th, 1974. The old map was right. Black Hollow exists. It's just not here. Not exactly. It's between things. I stood at the edge of something that didn't want to be seen. I felt eyes behind every tree. I don't think I was supposed to leave. October 25th, 1974. It followed me home. It knows I saw it. Every time I close my eyes, I see the stone covered in runes, humming like it's breathing. The map wasn't a guide. It was an invitation. A trap. I should have burned it. That was the last entry. There were dark smudges on the bottom corner of the page, like something wet had soaked into the paper, something that hadn't dried clean. My hands trembled as I closed the journal. Whatever Black Hollow was, it wasn't a forgotten landmark. It was intentionally hidden, scrubbed from history, feared, and my grandfather had known. I stuffed the journal into my bag and left without checking out anything else. Back home, the atmosphere was different. Still, pressurized. The hallway lights flickered even though I had changed the bulbs last week. Every corner of the house felt shadowed, as if the walls were bending inward. The map was gone. I froze in place at the foot of the stairs. Breath held. I had left it on my desk. I was sure of it. Then I saw it again, unrolled neatly on the kitchen table, right under the overhead light. And something had changed. Where before there were winding paths and rivers, now a new marking had appeared. A tiny red X drawn just outside the forest edge. And scrawled beside it in that same ink as the warning note. Come alone. Before the full moon, my blood ran cold. The full moon was in 2 nights. That night, I didn't sleep. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps pacing in the attic above me. Slow, deliberate, as if someone was dragging something heavy across the floorboards. But when I checked, the attic was empty. Except for one thing. In the center of the room, where I'd found the trunk, was a small, freshly carved symbol in the floor. A circle of teeth. By the next morning, I had made a decision. I was going to follow the map, not out of courage, not even out of curiosity. It was something more primal than that, like the map had coiled itself around my brain and was squeezing, whispering in thoughts that weren't mine. There was a pull to it, a gravity I couldn't explain. It had found me. And something told me it wouldn't stop until I obeyed. I'd packed a bag, flashlight, water bottle, phone, the journal, and the map, now stiff, as if the paper had dried into bark. I took a kitchen knife, too. Laughable, really, thinking it might protect me. I left just before dusk. The forest on the edge of town was a place I knew well, at least I thought I did. My friends and I used to ride bikes near the firebreak trails when we were younger. But as I reached the old wooden sign marking the entrance to the conservation area, A sudden wind pushed against me, warm and sour, like breath from a mouth too close. I ignored it and stepped onto the trail. At first, the forest was ordinary. Dirt paths, birdsong, shafts of dying sunlight breaking through the canopy. But half an hour in, things shifted. The trees became denser, taller, the air thicker. My phone lost signal completely. The birds stopped singing. Then I saw it. A crooked birch tree, just like Hawthorne had written about in his journal. Next to it, barely visible under a carpet of moss and dead leaves, was a narrow, winding path. It wasn't on any trail map I'd ever seen. With the map in one hand and flashlight in the other, I stepped off the known path and into the unknown. The air changed immediately. Cooler, heavier. The silence was so absolute it felt hostile. The deeper I went, the more wrong the forest became. Trees bent toward me like they were listening. Roots slithered beneath the dirt like veins. I could feel something watching. Not just me, but my intent like it knew I had come and was preparing. Every now and then, I caught glimpses between the trees' shapes. Movement. But when I turned to look, there was nothing. Just branches swaying too rhythmically for wind alone. Then I came to the stone. It stood in a clearing like a monolith, cracked and ancient, covered in symbols that throbbed slightly in the beam of my flashlight. They weren't carvings. They were scars. As I stepped closer, the air buzzed with a low-frequency hum I could feel in my teeth. There was a circle of blackened soil around the base of the stone, and in that soil, something moved. I leaned in, despite every screaming instinct. That's when I saw them. Fingers. Barely poking through the soil, pale, twitching. I stumbled. Back and tripped, landing hard. The map fluttered from my hand, and as it hit the ground, the runes on the stone flared faintly, reacting. Then I heard it, a voice, low, gravel and bone. Not from the stone, from beneath it. It said my name. I ran. Branches clawed at me. Roots grabbed at my ankles. But I didn't stop. I didn't dare look back. Whatever I'd awakened didn't. Want me to leave. When I finally burst back onto the main trail, the sun was completely gone. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. Back home, I locked the doors and turned on every light. I showered twice and still felt the forest. On my skin. That hum, the feeling in my teeth, it hadn't gone away. It was louder now, echoing in my bones. I laid the map out on the kitchen table, heart still racing. The red X was gone. In its place was a spiral, drawn in black ink that glistened like wet oil. Around the spiral, a single phrase had been added. Now we know you. That night, the dreams returned. Only this time, I wasn't alone in the forest. I was being led. A figure with no face, draped in shadow, walked just ahead of me, hand stretched backward, guiding me through the twisted woods. At one point, I looked down and realized I was no longer walking on leaves and soil. I was walking on faces, half buried, open-eyed, silent. One of them was my grandfather. I woke up screaming. And standing at the foot of my bed was the map, unfolded, pointing toward the attic stairs. Again, the attic door was ajar. I don't remember opening it. It had always been stiff, swollen with age and humidity, but now it hung open as though it had been used recently. As if it were waiting for me. I stood at the base of the stairs, heart pounding, the map clenched in my fist. Its paper was damp with sweat, or something wetter. The spiral at its center shimmered, oily and alive. Against my better judgment, I climbed. Each step creaked loud and sharp. The moment my head rose above the floorboards, I saw the change. The attic was no longer the dusty storage space I'd grown up ignoring. It had been rearranged. My grandfather's. Old furniture was gone. The trunks and crates had been pushed aside. In their place, the floor had been cleared into a near-perfect circle, centered around the symbol carved into the boards. The spiral. But now, it wasn't just carved. It pulsed. Lines of black ink had spread outward from it like veins, branching and twisting into strange patterns. Candles, ones I didn't own, had been placed around the perimeter. melted down to nubs, their wax pooled and hardened like skin. I stepped closer. A low vibration trembled through the sawdust of my feet, like a hidden engine beneath the house had come alive. As I crossed the spiral, the air shifted, and something clicked in my ears. Like the pressure of altitude changed, but wrong. Then the voices started again, soft at first. Too many to count. Whispering from the walls, from the corners, from inside the floor. Some were pleading, others laughing. A few just repeated my name over and over in a tone so familiar, I realized it wasn't them. It was me, my voice, begging. I stumbled backward, and the attic darkened fast. The single bulb above me dimmed to a dying ember. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the ceiling. One of them moved. It detached itself from the wall. Something long, thin, and human-shaped peeled away from the blackness, but it had no features, just a smooth overface, like wax melted too soon. It reached for me with arms that didn't bend right. I ran. The attic door slammed shut behind me. I didn't go back for the map. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with a knife in my hand and every light in the house on. I tried to call someone, anyone, but every number rang out into static. No voicemails, no ringtones, just silence. Around 3 a.m., the map reappeared on my kitchen table, burned along the edges, and now with more markings. A second spiral had formed. This one wasn't just ink. It was carved into the paper. Below it, in new scrawled handwriting, the door is open. Choose to enter, or be pulled. The next day, I drove out of town. Fast, desperate. I had one idea left. A historical society. If anyone knew what this was, what my grandfather had gotten into, it would be them. I still had the journal, and I brought it with me along with the knife and a desperate hope that I wasn't losing my mind. The office was tucked behind the city hall, dusty, neglected. Only one man was there. He looked ancient, stooped, and gaunt, with cataract-clouded eyes. When I told him my grandfather's name, he didn't react. But when I showed him the journal, he leaned in, and when I mentioned Black Hollow, he whispered, "They let you leave." My throat went dry. He took the journal gently, flipping through the pages until he reached the entry about the monolith. He didn't need to read it. He recited it from memory. Then he looked up at me with hollow, ruined eyes. "You shouldn't have followed the map," he said. "It marks you. It doesn't lead to Black Hollow. It makes it. Wherever you go." I asked him what the spiral meant. He pressed a shaking finger to the table and drew one in dust. As soon as the shape was complete, every light in the room flickered. "It's not a place," he whispered. "It's a calling. A path into the between. Some call it the echo. Some call it the folded. But it always begins with the map. Always ends with forgetting." I stared at him. Forgetting what? He didn't answer. He just stared at the door behind me. When I turned, the door was gone. Only wall. There was no door. I backed away from the wall, heart pounding. I ran my hand across the surface where the exit had been, expecting maybe a trick of light, a misremembered layout. But it was solid plaster, paint, cold. The old man hadn't moved. He sat perfectly still, hands folded over the journal like he hadn't spoken at all. "This is how it starts," he rasped. "You think you can walk away, but the hollow walks with you?" I demanded answers. I shouted, I begged. But he only repeated the same phrase. "It makes itself known when the spiral is complete." Then his head slumped forward. I rushed to him, thinking he'd collapsed, but he wasn't breathing. His body was ice cold, like it had been dead for hours. I backed away slowly, eyes darting around the room, searching for any window, any opening. That's when I saw it, the map. It was spread out on the wall. Not taped, not pinned, fused. It pulsed like muscle tissue. And the spiral, there were now 3. Interlocking, growing like tumors, spreading outward. Between them, drawn in black with inhuman precision, was the outline of a door. A real one. Its handle was ink. Its hinges etched with what looked like bone. And beneath it, the words, "Enter or remain forgotten." I didn't choose. Not really. Because the room began to change. The lights dimmed into red hues. The air thickened like syrup. And the floorboards around me stretched and twisted into spirals, just like the attic had. I stepped backward, and the wall behind me breathed. A long, slow inhale. I was being absorbed. So I did the only thing I could. I touched the ink door. It rippled beneath my hand like water. Cold and oily. Then, with a sickening lurch, the wall peeled open like a wound. I stepped through. Darkness swallowed me. Not just absence of light darkness. It was something active, like I'd been dropped into the stomach of the world. No sound. No temperature. Just pressure. And then, snap. Reality rewound itself. I stood in a forest. Not the one near my town. This was older. Wilder. The trees were massive. Taller than any I'd ever seen. Bark dark as ash and slick with moisture. The ground pulsed faintly beneath my boots. I turned and the ink door was gone. In its place was the map hovering in midair. The spirals on it rotated slowly, silently. The forest around me wasn't quiet anymore. It whispered, not in words, in memory. The sound of my mother calling me in for dinner. The thud of my grandfather's cane. The hiss of the attic door sliding open, all disembodied, all wrong. Then, up ahead I saw it. A house, old, colonial, crooked. Its shingles curled upward, and the windows were pitch black. But the front door stood wide open, inviting, and painted on the doorframe, as though in blood or tar, was a spiral. I approached, slowly. The front porch groaned beneath my weight, like it hadn't held anything living in years. The interior of the house smelled of mildew and candle smoke. Dust floated in the air in patterns that didn't fall. They drifted sideways. Against gravity. Against time. Inside, I found more symbols, more carvings. And photos. Black and white portraits, all of them featuring the same figure, a man in outdated clothing. In some he looked young, in others ancient. In one he was holding a knife, in another a map. In all of them his face was blurred, or burned out. And always behind him was that spiral, painted, burned, sewn into the wallpaper. It was everywhere. And then I saw the final photo. It was me, standing in the attic, holding the map, staring directly into the camera. Only I'd never taken that picture. I turned to run, but the hallway behind me was gone. The walls had folded into themselves, forming that same spiraled pattern. The wood groaned, the floor tilted. The house wasn't a structure. It was a mouth, and I was in its throat. Then I heard it, that gravel-deep voice from the stone in the woods, but now it wasn't speaking to me. It was chanting, calling something forward, calling me forward. The bearer of the map is the vessel. The vessel must descend. The descent is the offering. I stumbled toward the only remaining door in the house, a narrow one beneath the staircase. I threw it open, expecting a closet. Instead, I saw stairs spiraling downward into pure black, and carved into the wall. Beside it, in my grandfather's handwriting, you found it. Now finish what I couldn't. The stairwell swallowed sound. No echo followed my footsteps, only the rhythmic creak of old wood as I descended, deeper and deeper into the spiral. The walls around me were close-lined with decaying wallpaper that pulsed subtly, like flesh remembering breath. The map clung to my hand again, as if it had never left. I didn't remember picking it up. I didn't remember choosing to descend. But down I went. The spiral turned inward for what felt like miles. There was no light yet, I could still see, as if the darkness itself cast a glow. Around me the air grew heavy, almost fluid. Whispers returned, brushing my ears with voices I half recognized. My grandfather whispering, "We only follow what calls us." Myself crying out from some distant memory, a child's voice repeating, "Don't look away. It sees you when you blink." At the base of the spiral, the stairway opened into a cavernous space, impossibly vast. The floor was stone, wet and uneven, carved with more spirals within spirals, some leading off into impossible dimensions, pillars stretched upward into nothingness, floating just above the floor. At the very center of it all was it. The monolith. I'd seen sketches of it in my grandfather's journal, but they did no justice to its presence. It was blacker than black, carved with unknowable runes. Around it hovered fragments of the hollow images and places fractured from. The real world, my childhood bedroom, the hallway outside my apartment, the Historical Society's dusty records room. All shattered, all suspended in the spiral's orbit. I stepped closer, the map in my hand twitched. Then it spoke, not with a voice, but with thought, a sensation pressed directly into my brain. You have arrived. You carry the mark. You will either seal or open. Seal what? Open what? I knelt by the monolith, my breath fogging the air in front of me, though it was neither hot nor cold. The runes on its surface began to shift, contorting until they formed a recognizable shape. A spiral. It glowed with a dull red light and bled. I reached out. My fingers sank into the symbol like pushing through tar. Pain screamed up my arm. Visions exploded behind my eyes. I was back in my grandfather's study. Except the books on his shelves were whispering. The rug had become a mouth slowly opening beneath me. Outside the window, the sky was wrong, spiraling upward like water circling a drain. Then I saw him, my grandfather, but not as I remembered. His skin was pulled taut, mouth stitched shut, eyes black and weeping ink. He pointed behind me, trembling. I turned and saw myself, older, hollow-eyed, smiling, holding the map. You followed it too far, the older version of me whispered. Now you lead it back. The vision shattered. I was on the cavern floor again. The monolith cracked open down the middle, spilling thick, red-black liquid that moved against. Gravity, crawling upward. The walls of the hollow began to breathe in sync with me gasping. And then I heard the final words, a path must always open. If you do not open it, someone else will choose. I looked at the map. It had changed. No longer a spiral. Just a single line straight and final, beneath it, exit. I turned behind me. The spiral stairwell had vanished. Only one door. Remained in the stone a rectangular slit of light, humming faintly. I ran. The light grew brighter, hotter. It burned through me, peeling away voices, faces, thoughts. I couldn't remember my name. I couldn't remember my grandfather, but I remembered the map. Always the map. It was a part of me now. I stepped through. I woke up in my bedroom. The sun was shining through the blinds. My phone buzzed. Everything looked normal, except for the map, framed on the wall. It spirals perfectly still, waiting. Sometimes at night, I hear footsteps above me in the attic. Sometimes the map hums. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I see new paths forming lines that weren't there before. Spirals blooming like tumors. And I know the truth now. The map doesn't lead you to the hollow. It makes the hollow. And I am its cartographer now, plotting new paths for someone else to follow.